Hello everyone, I'm Lauren Maher and I'm here to speak to you today about my research master's project titled Serious Games for Low Energy Building Construction Worker Training. I'm in the final write-up stage of this project, which has been developed over the past 2 years in Technological University Dublin. The aims and objectives of this project were to identify the effectiveness of serious games for construction workers, to compare the serious gaming approach to more traditional approaches, and to explore the opportunities and potential of serious games for teaching construction workers low energy training. The primary research questions for this project are: to what extent can upskilling training be delivered through the use of serious games rather than with traditional methods? And to what extent can attitudinal change take place through the use of serious games? So a little background of this study. So prior to this study, the Foundation Energy Skills and QualiBuild, as part of the Build Upskills Ireland project, have undertook a skills gap analysis in relation to the implementation of low energy buildings. So some key conclusions of this skills gap analysis was that there was a visible knowledge gap opposed to a skills gap, and that there was a need for attitudinal change in the Irish construction industry. In order to answer the primary research questions, learning materials and resources that are used by QualiBuild to train construction workers in low energy buildings were used. So the three main learning outcomes that we wanted from this game was to be able to list and identify common areas of air leakage, to learn the principles of airtight and windtight construction, and to learn the importance of airtightness and windtightness. So this was mainly focused in Unit 3 of the Learner's Handbook. Before we get into this project, I just want to clarify what serious games are for anybody who may not be familiar with this term. Serious games are computer and video games that entertain users while achieving a primary goal of education or training. They are similar to educational games, but focused on an audience outside of primary or secondary education. Some learning domains that were used when developing this project included Bloom's taxonomy of learning. Stages that related to the project were remembering, understanding, applying, and analysing. Our study focused mainly on the affective domain, as we want to discover the attitudes and motivations of construction-based learners. Some frameworks and methodologies that have been used when designing and developing the game are the Design Play Experience framework, which is used typically to design games, the Mechanic, Dynamic and Aesthetic framework, which is used to analyse games, and the ADDIE model, which follows a type of iterative design process used to develop courses and games. Here is a visual representation of the methodology designed and used throughout this project. So our first stage was to run an initial fact-finding session or brainstorming session. This was used to gather data from the target audience about areas and key concepts on which construction-based workers typically struggled. It was also used to gather data about what the target audience wanted in a game and what they needed in a game. The second stage was to create components for the game. Using Blender, we created components for the game. The third stage was to create a prototype. This prototype was created in Unity and set the scene for our 3D game. The fourth stage is to test the prototype, so we run a usability and functionality playtest in order to discover some issues or pain points that the target audience might have with the game. The fifth stage then is to evaluate and to make any changes and refinements to the game. We then repeat stages 3 to 5 by going back, creating a new prototype, testing our new prototype, and evaluating that new prototype. Our initial fact-finding session was held in January 2019 with a group of construction-based learners. During this session, I showed a variety of learning and entertainment games to the group to allow them to visualise how the game could look and allow them to express any opinions or ideas that they have about the game to be designed. Some of the key concepts and skills that the workers struggled with were identified during the session. So these were the continuity of insulation, the effects of badly installed insulation, thermal bridging and effective airtightness, systems thinking, and typically just the overall Unit 3 of the QualiBuild Foundation Energy Skills Handbook. During the session, we also did some blue sky thinking and came up with some possible ideas for a game. So the next stage of the project then was to create our storyboards. Storyboards for 3 game ideas were sketched out and presented to supervisors for feedback. A narrative for the game was then chosen and digital storyboards were created. So next, prototyping tools such as Drawio, Twine and Fungus were used to flesh out the narrative and interactions within the game. So the next stage then was to actually start developing the prototype, the home. So using ProBuilder and Blender, prototype versions of the home that the game would be set in was developed. As you can see, ProBuilder allowed me to create the shell of the house, and Blender was used to add additional layers and walls such as the insulation, brickwork and plaster. It was also used to apply materials and textures to the house. Mixamo was used to design the characters within the game. Mixamo, for anybody who isn't familiar, is a free tool which has a lot of free rigged characters. So these come with a skeleton, which enables you to then add animations or move them around to be your main character within the game. The first round of testing was conducted to discover the usability and functionality of the game by members of the target audience. This testing took place with 10 participants, all of which completed a pre-game questionnaire and a post-game interview. The results of the testing session revealed that participants rarely looked at the instructions before or even during the gameplay. For the most part, they listened and read along with the information being given to them by the pop-up builder. Participants realized that after the first level that the information being given to them enabled them to complete the task and move on to the next. Participants also agreed and empathized with the family characters located all around the home. Results of the testing session revealed that the majority of participants in the session felt comfortable using the serious game, felt that they learned something from the game, felt that they enjoyed using the game over the traditional methods, and encouraged this new method of training construction workers. And the majority of our participants also encouraged attitudinal change regarding system thinking and working with other trades. So the main data collection tools used throughout this testing session were the pre- and post-game questionnaires, which were used to collect qualitative and quantitative data from the participants. So these questionnaires were split into 3 parts. The first part, which was used to measure the attitude towards trades in the industry and how they work together. The second part gathered information regarding their experiences and feelings towards using games and technology in general. And the third part was used to measure knowledge of the subject area, pre- and post-game play. Another data collection tool used was the in-game data collection application. So this was an application developed by myself and my supervisors in order to keep a log of each participant's timestamps when reaching game milestones. It also took a log of the questions that they answered throughout the game, any buttons that they clicked and any decisions that they made. This data was then compared against other participants in order to answer the research questions. The third method of data collection used was a short exit interview, which was used to gauge a participant's overall experience with traditional teaching methods and the game as a new teaching method. So answering the research question. The first research question, to what extent can upskilling training be delivered through the use of serious games rather than with traditional methods? So the research tools used to answer this first research question was the game, questionnaires, and the in-game data collection application and exit interviews. A mixture of all the data collected from these methods were used to answer the research question 1. The second research question, to what extent can attitudinal change take place through the use of serious games? The research tools used to answer this research question were the pre- and post-game questionnaires and the exit interviews. These allowed us to understand the attitudes of the construction workers before and after gameplay and measure whether or not they had changed. So using thematic analysis, the following recurring themes were identified. We got fun, positive feelings, technical ability concerns, age concerns, systems thinking, engagement, new ways of learning, and traditional learning methods. Data analysis was carried out using information gathered from the in-game data collection application and the questionnaires. Some interesting results from this data analysis are when participants were presented with the statement, I am aware that creating holes slightly bigger than needed around pipes, wires, etc. affects the building standard. So the blue represents agree and the orange represents slightly disagree. So as you can see from the pre- and post-game answers to this question, we have a significant increase in the awareness around the building standard. Similarly, when presented with a statement related to their attitudes towards other trades working on the same building, we see a further increase in participants' awareness of systems thinking. In order to demonstrate what the game actually looks like, I've made this short promotional video and I'll just play it now. So based on the results of this project, my hope is to develop the game and project further by expanding to more units of the Qualibuild training manual and handbook. If anybody has any questions, comments, or would just like to discuss the project further, please feel free to contact me on Twitter @LaurenMayer11 or through email seriousgamesresearcher@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed.